Welcome everyone. Today we have another new episode and we're going to discuss about the sustainable cities and community. And we have very special guest, Mr. Talib Rifai. He was Secretary General for UN WTO in year 2017 and very experienced diplomats as well as he has a lot of experience he will share with us. Besides that, we have a very strong panelist today, Professor Donalds, Mr. Brent, Mr. Paul, Mr. Rob, as well as Dr. Babu Afzal. Thank you everyone for joining today's sessions. I want to start with our honorable guest, Mr. Rifai. And sir, can you please introduce your huge experience and like your different roles with our audience and with our speakers?
Thank you so much for this kind introduction. My name is Talib Rifai. I was Secretary General of UNWTO, the United Nations World Tourism Organization, for 10 years. I ended it in 2018, January 2018. Thank you so much for being with us today. Before that, I'm calling you from Jordan, Amman, Jordan. I'm a Jordanian myself. I used to be Minister of Tourism, Minister of Information, Minister of Planning in Jordan. Now I'm retired, but I'm very active, I hope. And I would like to share with you some of the experience that was gathered over the years. That's what I want to say at this point in time. Thank you so much, Mr. Sharif, for bringing all this kind group of people together.
Thank you, sir, for joining today. We are discussing about the sustainable cities and communities, and definitely, like you have a huge experience on tourism and tourism-related city development. Many things actually you are developing around the world. So yes, Malaysia also a country where tourism is very important. So I want to start from Mr. Rob. How do you want to discuss about the sustainable cities concept? And already, like his last show about 3D printed, already I get too much of call from Asia Pacific, from China, from Singapore, from Malaysia about this 3D printed house and many things. They have, especially here, those who develop different cities, they have huge interest on 3D printed city. So yes, if you want to share your views and technological aspect with our audience.
Well, the goal for a sustainable city is zero waste. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. Whatever goes in kind of stays in. As we look at some of the background developments that are going on, things like factory farms are having an impact in highly dense areas. We can produce more food in less square footage with a factory farm now. Out here in Bend, Oregon, we're certainly exploring that with recreational drugs more than probably regular food, but it's still having an impact. The other aspects is putting in place programs to properly recycle what people are using, and then of course educating people to use their use materials properly, and so they're not polluting. We mentioned 3D building. That's one of the big new aspects of creating a sustainable city. 3D building requires far less time. You go from needing 40 people to build a home to 2 people to build a home. You go from 8 weeks to build a home to 2 to 3 days. The material use, the waste is reduced by 59%. We used the UK as an example. Their building industry generates 20 million tons of, 20 million tons of waste, and reducing that by 59% would certainly be significant. And finally, the long-term concept of a truly sustainable city was narcology. That's the idea that you build a city from the ground up as self-contained. Business, recreation, living are all in one single unit, and the city is built with the idea that it's going to be minimal waste. And as we have different weather events, for instance, we just had a huge weather event in Texas here in the United States. The idea of an arcology becomes very promising, because then the arcology controls its power, water, utilities, and the government does not, because government has been doing a good job out here of late. So that's kind of where I'd like to start. Is that's kind of the sum total of my knowledge, I guess, on sustainable cities. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Babur Afzal. Dr. Babur Afzal, can you unmute yourself? Yes, Dr. Babur Afzal, in the back
Yes.
still we are discussing about your pashmina. Even from World Talent Economy Forum, we are getting also a different call from Japan, from few corporations. They are really interested about your projects, what you are developing like pashmina. So yeah, even though we are discussing about sustainable cities, so we love to learn more about your pashmina.
Uh, Actually, we have a foundation called the Pashmina Good Foundation, which is a UK-based foundation, and we're structuring a lot of impact work uh, uh, through the foundation. Uh, the background is that in Himalayas, there is a community about 1 million strong community, which is directly linked to a very fragile ecosystem. And because this ecosystem in Himalayas is under direct impact of climate change, there is a lot of work that is required because there are multiple layers that need to be taken care of when we address or link or connect ourselves with this industry ecosystem. Now, Pashmina, as we know, it's the luxury fiber, it's the cashmere, the caviar of Kashmir. So our project and the foundation, I've also shared the link, pashminagoat.org. We are working on delivering on 8 of the 17 UN SDGs, where one is no poverty, three is good health and well-being of the community, quality education for the children, because this is a very poor community, but they are the real custodians of the luxury fiber, which is basically the inner coat of the goat that is produced in temperatures which fall below -40 and -50 degrees temperature. So decent work and economic growth, sustainable cities and communities, because this community is directly linked with this ecosystem, and this ecosystem is under a direct threat of climate change. So there is so much that is going on in this region. Climate action and life on land are also the SDGs that we're working on. So what we're doing is now, as we work on creating a sustainable economic model for this community, we are also looking at creating global awareness for this ecosystem, and we are also working on creating these councils. And formally, we are now trying to approach UN so that we get some formal association, because this project directly impacts 1 million people whose lives are directly linked to one industry. So I'm working in Himalayas, and where there are connectivity issues, there are a lot of challenges that we have. There's erratic climate cycles, because of which we are losing this livestock in Himalayas. In 2012, 25,000 Pashmina goats died of starvation, and the reason was every year the snowfall in that terrain is about 4 to 5 centimeters. In 2012, it was over 118 centimeters. So that in that the food of the goat got buried under snow for 3 months, and the goats. And it was a natural calamity, but a disaster that happened here. And from then I myself became a shepherd, and I've been working and living with this community. And now we are at a point where we are inviting help from all parts of the world, one, to save this species, which is also on the verge of becoming extinct. Second, to pull out a community out of depression, because there is no sustainable development that is happening here in this community, and because we do not have the right technology, so that these shepherds and weavers do not get upfront alerts. We are working on building a technology so that these shepherds get upfront alerts before avalanches come and things like that. So we are actually working on a lot of facets of UN SDGs, and there are many SDGs we are aligned to, because this
Good.
community holds the ancient culture, wisdom, religion of Himalayas. So it is also about productivity, and we are looking at sustainable development by building these micro projects around the challenges that we have. So there is this one project called the Pashmina Good Project, and we are linking the world with this. So what we are doing this year is we are building these councils, the Outreach Council, the Innovation Council, the Technology Council, and because we are aligned with UN SDGs, we are looking at a lot of help coming from that part of from UN in this part of the world, and we are looking at some good impact for 1 million strong community here.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Professor
Doctor,
Donalds,
are you based in Nepal?
what your
Are you based in
advice?
Nepal?
So
Where
I
are
am
you
based in
based?
Kashmir,
India, Kashmir.
Okay,
India.
Pakistan.
No,
Okay,
India, India side
India.
of
Thank you,
India
thank you.
side of Himalayas.
Thank you so
Yes.
much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Donalds. How we can develop sustainable cities?
Well, cities grow around some sort of they grow some economic engine of some sort. So you have cities like New York City and San Francisco and in the United States, and of course throughout the world it's similar. London, all of the cities in the world, a lot of them grew around transportation. They were places where the shipping industry could meet the land transportation, the rail. So Chicago, all in the United States. So we can build new cities and build them from scratch, but it's hard to kind of get the scale, because there's a about 12 square block area in New York City that adds more to the US GDP than the state of Oregon. And so the economic investment in some of the cities that we have right now is so incredibly huge that it's incomprehensible. The city of New York is probably at least 1 or 2% or more of the GDP of the United States. It's an incredible. So building cities from scratch probably isn't as important as looking at what we have already now and trying to look at the sustainability goals that the UN has come up with, which make a lot of sense, which is about education, health, environmental, being better environmentally. And I just looked it up, and of the sustainable cities in the world, one of the top ones is San Francisco, which is basically where I am. And so what are the goals? It's as Rob said, one of the most important goals for sustainability is the energy balance, so that that it's carbon neutral. And then but besides the obvious, or not so necessarily obvious, but besides the environmental issues of cities, like how they work, the question in the United States has really got to be a huge problem of the issue of healthcare and education, where we're falling down more and more. And I think that those are kinds of things that people have to value. So when you go to someplace like where I know in Malaysia or Singapore, places like that, education is extremely valued, and educated people are highly respected. In some places they're not. And so those kinds of things that are hard. I think the only thing that you can do is something like you're doing here, and try and get people with different perspectives and offer them the opportunities and show them what the value is for being able to do the different kinds of things, which is why I'm constantly on about the importance of entrepreneurship and growing, having individuals be able to turn their innovations and creativity into something that earns them and others a living, which is my thing. So
Thank you.
it's very
Thank you.
abstract. I'm more interested in listening to the people here who know a great deal about it.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Brent Elmans, you are also trying to get involved with politics, modern politics, and we have very successful politicians like Mr. Talebi, and he run ministry. he was Secretary General for UN's, and most important thing is that he developed a lot of policy level discussions and many diplomatic relationship around the world. So what your expectations, like especially you are working with the youth communities, so what type of like development we need even in the like COVID-19 situation, how we can develop our knowledge, our skills, and how we can take especially support like from like today's panelist, how we can make a better ecosystem.
Sure, absolutely. I appreciate the introduction, Sharif. Yeah, so I am working with some youth in a variety of places. One of the nonprofits that I work with, our focus is on Africa. In Africa, the median age is about 19. So, I'm a bit of a progressive, and I'm definitely a forward-thinking individual. And so something that excites me about Africa is the way that they don't have restrictions due to the infrastructure that's already in place. Here in the United States with things like energy, I mean, you look at Texas, that was like the big problem, is that they were trying to branch out and, not utilize this national grid. But I still think that there's some interesting potentials.
Go ahead.
Mr. Brent, can you hear me?
Lost.
Oh, sorry, I think he lost. Professor Paul, I'm sure that you have
There's some interesting
deeper
potential for play.
It's a very weak connection.
Sorry. Professor Paul, can you please
Can
continue?
you hear me now? Sorry about that.
Yes, now we can hear you. Yes.
Sorry about that. It's snowed here. Sometimes my connection's slowed up when it snows. But yeah, as I was saying, I think that in these new environments, it really allows a lot of opportunity to try new things that the rest of the world can kind of take note on.
Where are you calling from?
Donald was talking about. I'm here in
Where are you calling
Colorado, Denver, Colorado.
Colorado. Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's great here.
Professor Paul, I'm sure that you have very good research on sustainable cities, and you are also a climate activist. So how do you want to introduce this topic, this climate, like sustainable cities and the communities? How can we build this ecosystem?
Okay, well, I think from the example of the wildfires recently in California, making it very difficult for people to breathe in major cities there, and rural areas, of course, widespread parts of California, and then now the major cities in the U.S. in the south, in the deep south, specifically in Texas, Houston, San Antonio, Austin, major cities, millions of people without access to electricity for a lot of this week. At the height of the outages, we had over 5 million people in the million homes, residences in the U.S. without power. If you take an average of 3 people per residence, that's we're talking about 15 million people in the U.S. And in Texas alone, it was about 4.5 million residences, which was 13.5 million people without power. Some of them for longer than 3 days. So cities became a very bad place to be, when there's that type of situation occurring. Not only do they lack power, but the water purification plants were knocked out, so they lacked fresh water. They were given boil water advisories in the big cities in Texas, and of course, without power and with natural gas lines frozen, they couldn't. How could they possibly boil water, right? They couldn't boil water. They would have been better off to have melted some snow, in places, bring some snow into some warm places and melt it and drink that water. That would have probably been safer than that would have been maybe doable as opposed to boiling, city water. One of the things that is really dystopian about that event in the cities is, imagine living in those cities, in the suburbs, and your suburbs have no electricity or you can't boil water, no lights. And come nighttime, you see the skyline of the city off in the distance lit up as normal, like a Christmas tree. So the light in the cities was shining brightly while you were in your cold, dark home, and that infuriated many people, of course. So it doesn't take much. We need resilient planning of cities. When there's a major power failure, where do you want your power to go? You want it to go to people. You don't want it to go to empty buildings where people aren't getting to anyway because the roads are all snow covered. So that's a very simple thing. When there's a major power failure in a city, redirect, have shut off switches to the buildings that are sitting empty, and don't have them being lit up like Christmas trees. It's very dystopian. So the root cause of this can happen to any city in what I call the climate casino. Okay, so Texas was the latest place to have very bad luck in the climate casino, but any particular place on the planet can happen to. There can be these risks that you can assess the risks of different places. Essentially, what's happening is the Arctic is warming much faster than the rest of the planet. We have this phenomenon called Arctic amplification, where the temperature is much greater, the warming is much greater in the Arctic, and that slows down and causes the jet streams to meander in the north-south direction, become more meridional. And when you get this very deep trough, which happened over the US, it's plunged the country into coldness. So what's happening is the warming in the Arctic causes very strong updrafts of warm air. So it's warming not just at the surface more than any other place in the Arctic. It's warming at the upper altitudes at the level of the jet streams, and that warming then can go north. It can go upward into the stratosphere, and it can break apart, disrupt the polar vortex. And when the polar vortex was disrupted, which is what's happening right now, you get a massive amounts of cold air spilling out of the Arctic over mostly the continent, so over North America and over Europe and Eurasia. Okay, so this is clearly what's happening. It happened last year at the same time, but it didn't have the same effect on people. So myself and others have been saying, we have a climate emergency, and it's an Arctic type thing. And when the Arctic's been warming like crazy and has huge temperature anomalies, 20-30 degrees Celsius above normal. Now, people in the cities in the south haven't cared about that, but now the implication is of this huge warming of the Arctic. Where does the cold air go? Okay, the cold air has plunged southward into the US and into Asia. Now, when the cold air plunges out of the Arctic, obviously it's replaced by much warmer air in the Arctic, and that contributes to the Arctic warming. So the cold air plunging south is a huge warming of the Arctic when you think about it. The Arctic warms by itself because it's a darker place. It's not reflecting as much sunlight. So it's warming because the absorption of sunlight is much larger, but it's also a plunging, an outbreak of cold air from the Arctic to much lower latitudes is also a huge warming of the Arctic. So all of these events that are occurring are, if you like, they're representing an equalization of temperature across the with respect to latitude. So when we lose the Arctic sea ice completely in a summer, the end of a summer within the next 5-10 years, say, I call it the blue ocean event, then all of these extreme events that we're seeing in severe weather are going to be exacerbated. We're going to see an increase in frequency, severity, and duration of these events, and they're happening in places where we never had them before. So this is going to knock out a lot of the global food supply at some point. Okay, there's going to be simultaneous cascading failures, and then the entire world will be in a situation that, of climate mayhem. And, we're experiencing it. Usually up to now, we've experienced it in a particular region, like a city, when a massive superstorm comes ashore. Now we're experiencing it in entire states, over very large regions. And, in the near future, we're going to experience it on a global basis, via the food supply. So we need to prepare ourselves for this, and we need to do everything possible to try to back off from this type of climate disruption that we're seeing.
Thank you, sir. Honorable guest, Mr. Talib, I have some question, but I want to take a question from our audience, because I think the audience ask a questions specifically on tourism sectors. Our audience, Humaira Tanzila, her question is that what are the strategies which helps tourism sector to overcome the losses created by the pandemic? Okay, even I already said that in Malaysia for COVID-19 situation, I think it's hit a lot in the tourism industry. And I'm sure there are other countries, those who have strong dependency on tourism sectors, they lose many business. So in that situation, you are very successful, like diplomats as well as ministers, and you have expertise in tourism industry. So what kind of strategy we should take in that situation?
Thank you so much, Mr. Sharif. Let me first react a little bit to what I heard, and then I'll answer your question directly. First of all, when we talk about sustainable cities, talking about sustainability, as much as I respect climate change and sustainability and environmental sustainability, sustainability is not just about the environment, as important as that is. I'm not an expert like Mr. Paul on the effect of the climate change, but I can tell the danger and the risk we're all in. Sustainability is about sustaining life on Earth. That's what it is. How do we maintain life on Earth? And sustainability, therefore, according to the United Nations, has three pillars: environmental sustainability, social sustainability, and economic sustainability. We don't concentrate much on social and economic sustainability, unfortunately, especially except for Mr. Babar, who had just focused on the community. But the rest have not given that enough attention. Sustainability is it's not about freezing everything as is, not touching anything, as if it's forbidden to do that. The story of mankind is about sustainability, and the story of mankind talks about how to grow and how to progress. Sustainability is not anti-progress, nor anti-growth. We talked about the city of New York. The city of New York was not more beautiful when it was Manhattan first. Venice was not more beautiful before, or the city was built. So it's nothing wrong in touching the environment. Just need to be how you touch it, where to build the skyscraper, not for or against the skyscraper. How to build it, what to build, how does it affect everybody's life? That's what we need to talk about. When we talk about sustainability, we're not just talking about the environment. Please, let's broaden our thinking a little bit. Now, regarding the pandemic, Mr. Sharif, the pandemic is a serious issue now. In the Chinese language, the word crisis and the word opportunity are the same word. We don't use something different. So there are many opportunities that can come out of each crisis, as you all well know. Now, how are we going to deal with that? First of all, each government is working on its own now. The international multilateral system has fallen apart completely. If you really think about it, the EU is not working together, even the United States now. They're not united anymore. Each state is acting on its own. The UN is not working together. So what we need is a better multinational system to build it from bottom up, a new international system, multilateral system. Because each country now is working, each government understandably is working on its own. Each one is devising their own procedures, their own protocol. But how about what the others are doing? Some countries have quarantine. Some countries have vaccine better than others. Some countries have testing better and cheaper and more affordable than others. What we need to do is bring all of this together. Some countries are creating a bubble and a corridor in between. We need to connect the whole world with bubbles and corridors. That's the only way we could survive, because we cannot face this pandemic without cooperating together as a human community. We definitely need to do that. And in order to do that, we need to rebuild the multilateral system altogether. This is my belief. You can't fly from one country, be quarantined, and go to another country where it's required only 72 hours of testing, or another country that requires a passport now for vaccination. Who said that the world is going to be vaccinated within this year? Nobody can guarantee that. In order to make tourism and travel connect the world as it does, the world must be connected in a much better way. That's what I believe in. Thank you so much, Mr. Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Rob. I think you want to share some strategic point of view. Yes, Mr. Rob.
Well, that was actually a brilliant comment. One of the problems we've had with dealing with the pandemic in particular is we tried to deal with the pandemic as a standalone and forgot the economic and social aspects of the communities. And as a result, we traded off the economics and the fact that people have to interact, and we got a revolt, and that meant the overall execution of the antivirus strategy was compromised because we looked at it too narrowly. Same point with regard to when I brought up arcology. So the arcology is a concept that really comes forward when you really don't believe that governments or cities or politicians will work together, and it's industry taking the problems in their own hand and creating isolated communities that are self-contained and self-sustaining. And it kind of depends on whether you think these governments can come together. I'm not convinced that they can. There's just been too much disagreement over long periods of time. But the point is that should be the way we do it. These problems are world problems. They are not problems of any individual area. And we saw with the Paris Climate Accord, where Paris itself isn't even in compliance, that if everybody doesn't work together, the countries with low socioeconomic levels suffer as a result of those countries that are well off, and that disparity creates huge problems. And back to the virus, we're going to still, even if we vaccinate the hell out of everybody in the developed country, countries will still be getting infected by those coming from undeveloped countries that haven't been vaccinated. It is a world problem, and it requires a world solution. But getting politicians to think strategically is kind of like trying to pull a camel through the eye of a needle. They just don't do it. That politicians, and I should say business executives, consistently operate on a tactical time frame, either things that can get done during their term to assure their reelection, or for business, things that can provide economic benefits on a quarterly basis, not even on an annual basis anymore, which makes it incredibly hard to drive initiatives that cut across countries, cut across cities, let alone countries. So there is a fundamental core problem that we have in terms of dealing with things on a global basis, and unless we can figure out a way to solve problems on a global basis, the only way we're going to be able to do this is on a micro basis, which long term isn't going to be sustainable. It may sustain the human race for a while, but eventually the parts of the world that we're not taking care of, we're going to take out the parts of the world that we are. It only will work if we do this holistically. Yet I don't see a path forward to do that. The very people that we need to drive those efforts are not going to cooperate. At least they haven't historically cooperated at a level that would allow us to do it. So I absolutely agree with the fact that this is a global problem that requires a global solution. I just don't see a path to get there.
Thank you, Dr. Babar. Dr. Babar Afzal. Yes. Unmute, please.
Yes, that's right.
Yes, this is interesting. As my journey in the past 8 years of becoming a shepherd and then representing a very large community. Elinor Ostrom, who died a few years back and who also got a Nobel Prize, who worked on the paper called the tragedy of the commons, and where she proposed that how do you there is overgrazing everywhere, and how do you structure communities and how do you structure bigger organizations practically, where you have you have a community which is dependent on something, let us say for on environment. So how do you structure them? Who takes control of that resource? Is there, because overgrazing happens, because there is no control on the common, and because common is not owned by anyone, there's a tragedy that will always continue to happen on that resource. Now, there are multiple ways when we look at this problem, and she proposed that initially, if the community, because the government will come and put a fence around that, let us say we're talking about a common pasture. She takes the example of a pasture. She said, if there is overgrazing on the pasture, one day there will be nothing left on the pasture. Now, when there is nothing left, suddenly, there is chaos that happens in that ecosystem because no one owned it, no one took care of it. And this is where I think the world is also evolving. And how do you control it is one way is initially the proposal was that the government creates a policy to control that common. But the better approach is that the community takes care of that common, because they're and this is the reason why we have so many problems. We have because we have air pollution as an example, because no one owns the air. There is so much pollution that is happening. No one takes care of it. We have traffic jams. Why? Because no one owns these roads. There are traffic jams. Similarly, when you see there is overfishing in oceans because no one owns them. So what kind of policy should be there when we talk about sustainability of cities? What kind of structure would be there in terms of control, so that there is no over exploitation of a resource, and there is a balance that is maintained within that ecology. So from where I am in Himalayas, I see this on a daily basis, because there are so many tragedies that have happened because in the environment that we are living in, majority of the challenges that we face are problems which are induced by humans. Now, we even when we talk about structuring a business or a community, and the relationship between a community, government, and the NGOs, the non-government organization, we see that even there is disparity within the structure, because on one side we reward a business for the work it does, but on the other side we see how often do we congratulate a generational auto manufacturer, where they say that the number of cars that this generational auto manufacturer is putting on roads, and how is it taking us away from poor consumption habits? And I think consumption and poor consumption habits are a very important thing when we talk about sustainability of the cities, because there is overconsumption that is happening, and that is where when we talk about sustainability, because anything that goes into the ecosystem, there is no way that it goes out. And we talk about circular economies today, and that is becoming popular, which is also linked to the sustainability of the cities, of the environment, of economic sustainability of the community. So I would again what just has been said, that the I mean, one part of the problem is and has got attention, but the problems which have not got attention, which is linked to the economic sustainability of the communities, and environment sustainability has been in focus. So there are multiple models which need to be structured so that everything is incorporated into solutions that are being proposed. Thank you, Mr. Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Professor Donalds, when we discuss about sustainable cities, we think about a lot of technologies, and definitely technology can help us to grow a proper ecosystems. So what the major technology we should focus right now? Can you unmute yourself?
Sorry, the button
Yes,
was hiding there. I managed
that's
to
better.
find it.
Much better.
Well,
Donald.
I want to mention something that goes back to the point about how we have to work collaboratively. And interestingly enough, the state of Texas, which has got this miserable situation right now, made a decision at one point that they did not want to cooperate with the rest of the United States. So they deliberately created a power grid that did not interact with the power grid of the rest of the country. If they exchanged power with other states, then they would be doing interstate commerce, which becomes under the regulation of the federal government. And the state of Texas did not want to do that. They didn't want to cooperate with anyone else. And so part of the problem that they had was when their power went out, they couldn't get power from other states. And that's what we do in California. When we run out of power, we get power from Oregon and Nevada or wherever ever around. So I think that's a very, very good example of where we need to work together. There is another Nobel Prize economist, and let me remember her name. It is, one second here. It's Elinor Ostrom. And she wrote a book called, or her paper that got her a Nobel Prize was called Beyond the Tragedy of the Commons. And she pointed out that all over the world, there are commons that are working quite effectively and have for a long time. It's interesting. I live in California, and there's a group of people, the Ohlone. They were the Native Americans that lived here. And somehow they went thousands of years without any major disruptive event. They somehow managed to come out with some sort of a birth control system. California is abundance of everything, food and water and everything that they needed. And so they managed to create a stable society that lasted thousands of years. So it's not, I don't believe that it's true that human beings can't cooperate. And I'm a big supporter of multinational institutions. I disagree that governments are, part of a problem and that they can't work together, because I've lived in Finland and I know very well that the Finns consider the government as an extension of themselves. They are very open and egalitarian. Their president and the council are all women under 35 except one. And they've developed a situation where they believe that paying taxes help and educating the people around them makes them stronger. And so something about beliefs, that the belief that you have to be isolated and individual from the rest of the world and cut yourself off, you can see the consequences in Texas. Whereas if you look at Finland, a country with virtually no resources, absolutely horrible weather, horrible food, but somehow they've managed to become one of the most successful economies in the world. So, and it's partially because of the relationship they have their government. So technology isn't just things. And certainly the United States and many other countries need, the United States I can use as an example, our infrastructure is terrible right now. Cities themselves are actually environmentally very good. They allow for public transportation. I live in a town that's dependent on tourism, and we can talk about that later. But it has no public transportation. Like, I wanted to go get my COVID shot yesterday, and the way that they have COVID shots is you have to drive in a car. And since I don't drive, I had to find somebody that would take me, and it's ridiculous. But yet, that's the way it is. And the people here are all proud of themselves about how wonderful and environmental they are, even though the situation is that they're utterly dependent on cars, and their carbon footprint is far, far worse than other places. But again, it's where I live in California, people wear masks. We actually voted to increase our taxes so that we could have more services. We actually, and support people who needed the help. We are doing an independent support besides the federal government for the people who've been losing their jobs and livelihoods on COVID. It can be done. It's not built into human beings not to be able to cooperate and it's not built into the idea that governments are always, always the problem. And so I think the technology we need is basically education to get people to, I don't know how to get people to have a sense of the fact that they're not individuals, but that's what we have to do.
Thank you, Mr. Brentelman. You are also working with one of the think tank transdisciplinary agora for future discussion, and you specifically work with this African nation. So what are the present conditions when you work with South Africa, in Nigeria and other countries in terms of sustainable cities and education? What's going on? What the real experience you have?
It's diverse, to say the very least. So the Transdisciplinary Agora for Future Discussions, TAFs, our founder, Osinakachi, he actually just this week, he's in Nigeria, and as I said, it's diverse. And right now, he's been dealing with some tribal wars, and his village was just burned down. I think that there were about 60 people that were murdered. His family home was burned down in his village, and that was just in the last couple days. So, things are, South Africa is very different. Nigeria, they have these cities. There's just such a gap between certain areas and certain places, from my understanding. So it really is disheartening. And I think that the idea of this holistic approach is definitely necessary when you think about these kinds of things, because there's just a certain point where certain areas of society gain a little bit of momentum, and they aren't really it's not human nature to necessarily bring everyone with you. There are some people that kind of want to do that, but a lot of times when these folks get that momentum, it's they see it as their opportunity to move past these other situations and things like that. So I think that there's a lot to consider, but I guess that's kind of where things are at, though, with Africa. That's at least what's on the top of my mind right now. It's really
thank you. Yes, thank you, Professor Paul. Like, climate change really challenging things. Even example, Bill Gates said that it will be worse than this COVID situations, and the developing nations has a lot of challenges, and we have expert from United Nations, and he has a lot of experience. But fact is that how do we work together, solve together? We have many agencies, corporations, UN, NGO, governments, many more things. But how we can find out the sustainable strategy in the COVID situations? So what the solution we have?
Well, I think that we need to have better overall organization within society. I think there's an awful lot of these so-called silos where, one organization, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. Different groups are doing their own thing, and there's not overall coordination. And to have overall coordination on a global basis, we need very powerful organizations like the UN to actually have lots of clout to be able to organize. And we have to use good examples. Like, there are countries, for example, with COVID, that have pretty much demolished the virus, like New Zealand, for example. I mean, as bad as the virus is, it is, if you look at the number of infected people the first week of December, it was over 5 million, I believe, that week, new infections. And if you look at the number of people in the last week globally, the numbers were about half that. So 2.5 or 2.7 million people. So, all viruses go away, all pandemics end some way, whether the virus mutates and becomes endemic, or whether, if you look at the Spanish flu, people back then were saying, oh, this thing's never going to end. And they never had a vaccine back then, but the virus went away after several years. So I fully expect whatever we do, vaccines can speed the process, but I fully expect that, even if we didn't have vaccines, this virus will work its way through the system and then disappear within a few years of when it started. So we got another year of that. And then scientists are going to say, well, what happened? We got to figure out why it disappeared. And they'll try to invoke the shutdowns, they'll try to invoke vaccines or policies or things they're doing. And I think the reality is seasonality. The reality is that even if they didn't do anything, it's going to work its way through the system and vanish. So they can all pat themselves on the back. Now, getting back to the cities, more and more people globally live in the cities. So let's look at the temperature. If you look at the average temperature of major cities around the world, the average temperature rise, of those cities is far, far greater than the global average. Far, far greater. We've got the urban heat island effect, for example, where, cities are a lot of asphalt and concrete and dark surfaces that absorb sunlight. So cities are often warming at rates 2-3 times faster than the rural areas that are around the cities. Now, they're also on land is also warming in general at least twice as fast as the global temperature average. And if you're at high latitude, then the warming is even greater. Like Canada, for example, the entire country has warmed at twice the global average warming rate. So if you look at cities in Canada, you've got twice the global warming rate. Then you're in the city versus you're in continent versus the ocean. So that's twice as fast as, warming on land is twice as fast as warming over the oceans. And then you're in a city. So that's another factor of 2. And if you're at high latitude, that's another factor, right? So if you so cities are warming, nobody lives at the global average temperature or experiences the global average warming. But if you're in a city, there's many, many magnification effects. Also, if the city is at high elevations, like a city like Denver, the Mile High City, the higher up you are in altitude, the greater the warming is. So high regions are warming at twice as the rate as lower regions. So what is that average warming? Well, in 2020, the number they came up with is 1.25 degrees Celsius warmer than the 1880 to 1910 average. But when we talk about the context of 1.5 or 2 degrees, those guard bands from the UN and all the climate conferences, those numbers were originally relative to a baseline of the year 1750. So the baseline has shifted. So if you want to compare the warming last year in 2020 to the original pre-industrial baseline of 1750, you need to add another 0.3 degrees Celsius to that number, because that was the difference in temperature between the 1750 and the 1880 to 1910 baseline. So that 1.25 global average warming becomes 1.55, already exceeding the 1.5 number. If you look, that's for a whole year. If you look for a specific month, a couple months in the winter exceeded the global temperature, exceeded the pre-industrial baseline for that month by 1.85 degrees Celsius. So we're in dire straits already. So we need to do things in cities to reduce the urban heat island effect, right? We need to have, we can't have dark surfaces all over cities. So that's why, things like green roof programs, etc., are very, very important. And also, COVID has shown that more and more people can do their work on Zoom in forums like we're doing now and work at home. So in some places in Canada anyway, and I'm guessing in other places around the world, there seems to be a movement of people out of cities into rural areas because they can build a bigger house, a bigger property. They don't have the congestion of the city, and they can work, they don't have to be in a city to do their work. Okay, so there's that movement that's occurring. And what that has done is driven up prices of houses in all of the suburban areas. And I've already mentioned, the people that are in Texas in the suburban areas, that they look into the city skyline and they can see them lit up with power. So there can't be a class divide, if you like, between people in rural areas and people in cities. We can't have a Hunger Games type scenario, which is the case in many places. Sometimes you see, I'm thinking of some cities in South Africa, for example, where there's golf courses and opulence, and then the city skyline on one side, and there's basically a fence, and on the other side is slums and poverty and no potable water, etc. It's almost like a complete divide of the social classes, and that leads to huge societal problems. Independent of wait till we have global food shortages, as I mentioned in my previous chat. Then that will exacerbate all of these problems. So we have we can't just take half measures. We're in this emergency situation. There's no other way to describe it. We're living in the so-called climate casino. The weather can whiplash from one thing to the other thing over a period of weeks. I mean, it's probably what's probably going to happen in Texas in a few weeks. Will be in a heat wave. Right, temperatures will be 20 Fahrenheit, 30 Fahrenheit above the normal, right? And this whiplashing from one state to the other state wreaks havoc on infrastructure and on society. So we have to, when we talk about sustainable development, I like to think, maybe we should be really talking about sustainable retreat, or how do we maintain some semblance of an organized society and with the onslaught of climate change and this year and last year the coronavirus. So all of these factors, we have a very urgent situation. We don't have time we have to do things. We don't have time just to talk about things.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Taleb, I think many important issues come, especially on climate change, sustainable issues. We have many challenging situations right now. So,
hello, sir.
Hi.
Good afternoon.
Hi. Okay, I'm hearing you.
Yes, Mr. Taleb.
How are you doing?
Yes.
Good. Well, thank you first for connecting. I really appreciate it.
Okay.
Okay, I think Mr. Rob.
Sure. What's the question?
Okay, my question is that
I'm sorry. I'm done. Okay.
Okay. Yes, actually, our speakers, Mr. Paul, come up with different aspect of climate change. So how we can work together on these climate change issues?
Okay. Now, Mr. Rob here made it almost impossible for us to imagine that governments are going to be working together. But Donald explained another side of it. I believe that this pandemic has uncovered some of the weaknesses of the multilateral system. This multilateral system has to disappear anyhow. It had weaknesses in it. Like Texas, for example. You're talking about Texas. Why is Texas not part of the United States? Why aren't we all part of the United Nations? Why is Britain not part of the EU? Or France not part of the EU? France and Spain are two countries within the EU now. Each one has a different protocol. They can't work together. So the people are going to drive this through, I'm sure. I'm very optimistic that the new system is going to be rising out of the ashes and build up together a new international system to do that. Now, regarding climate change, it's another issue. It's an issue that cannot be solved without international cooperation again. I can't stress this enough. It's a political system. It's a political issue. It's not a technical issue. Is there a political will to address the problems or not? The world does not have a political will yet to address these problems. That's our problem. But they will develop it as time goes by. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rob.
Yeah, so my point isn't that governments can't do it, it's just that they won't do it. It's the issue is that what motivates them is not aligned with what we need them to do. They tend to think short term, not long term. They tend to think more people that are elected to political office are highly status driven by nature.
But won't they be forced to do that?
Well, they're
going to force,
but at some point, the ecosystem degrades to a point that human intervention can't change it. We're still before that point. The chances are that by the time that governments finally realize that we're in crisis and they have to operate together, we will have gone too far and we won't be able to bring it back. The ecosystem is already dropping out of balance. And we can look across the universe to see how very rare it is that planets reach this balance. The planet we live on is virtually unique, at least as far as we've so far discovered. And that means that once we drop out of balance, getting it back into balance may be impossible given current technology. And we'll have to treat this like we treat Mars. And of course, a lot of the effort to go to Mars is this idea that, well, if we screw up on the Earth, then we can terraform Mars and live there. We don't have that technology yet either. So you kind of get the sense that a bunch of people are going to end up in Mars and they're not going to come back, and they're not going to be able to sustain there either. Don's point that there are governments that are working well is well made. There are governments that are working well, but they tend to be the minority, not the majority. And even in their own environments, they don't cooperate well with other governments. Philly pointed out that we've got issues across the EU with regard to cooperation. And of course, here in the United States, we have Texas that's all but rebelled and was talking about, until this latest crisis, they were pretty aggressively talking about us doing their own version of Brexit, which hasn't worked all that well for the UK either, which showcases we don't do a good job of learning from others. So at the end, it may come down to education. What we have to start someplace, and if we can properly educate people as to where to look for strategic problems and motivate them to address those problems, then perhaps collectively we can come up from the bottom as opposed to the top and fix this problem. I wish I could point to an effort, a global effort that has this potential. There is certainly hope. Some of the efforts that are going on to clean up, for instance, ocean-borne plastics are cutting across nations and starting fairly low in countries as opposed to the top, and still getting it done. Technology companies in and of themselves have recognized that this is a major problem and are actually contributing pretty heavily towards sustainability efforts globally. But companies, even collectively, can't do this alone, and that takes us back to perhaps the way to do this is you create arcologies around groups that believe in sustainability, and then if you get to critical mass with them, then by their very nature of mass efforts to create sustainable environments, that maybe we can save the planet. The Lifeboat Foundation, which is a foundation I belong to, has been warning out about a number of these things for now about 2 decades, and there still remains a very high concern that the political motivations, which are status driven, will end us before we can figure out the social aspects of sustaining the environment. But boy, I wish I had more hope. Some of the technology efforts, like social media, have not been. We originally thought were going to help us. The free flow of information was going to make stuff easier. It did not. It basically bifurcated folks and caused them to separate into groups that either believe or don't believe almost religiously in what's happening. And that's problematic. So at some point, we have to start at the core of the problem, which I believe is education, then drive it up through the political ecosystems, and maybe stop rewarding people that want to be politicians with political roles, and instead pick people that are qualified that maybe don't want to be politicians, and put them in because of their qualifications, not because they're chasing status. But other than that, I don't have a great fix for this.
Thank you. Mr. Taleb. Mr. Taleb, do you want to add some point? Can you unmute yourself?
Thank you. I completely agree with Rob. I think our problem is a political problem in choosing our politicians, that's for sure. But now, where do we go from this point on? That's the question. We go in believing that we can make it as people, because the people of the world are paying the price at the end of the day. It's the communities, the local community. That's what sustainability is all about. Sustainability is about keeping life on Earth going. That's what sustainability is. And I believe that we can do it. We can make it together. We need just to rethink our system. I think the United States has learned a big lesson now. The EU still is shaking from its repercussion. The UN altogether is not working well. AU, African Union, as well. I'm sorry to say this to you, but I'm a patron of the African Tourism Board as well. I know Africa is trying its best. Future is Africa without doubt. Brent, you know that. But still, they need to work together. They need to be one. That's the challenge. And we are doing that. We're doing that, Rob. Believe me. You know, I woke up this morning in Jordan. I'm in Amman, Jordan. It's full of snow now. It's completely white, which is very unusual. But it's nice. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, thank you. Actually, I'm very much lucky because when I develop World Talent Economy Forums, the speaker, even those who joined today, everybody actually supporting our initiative. Even Mr. Taleb is a very experienced politician. He support me a lot.
Of
I think
course.
few messages he just said, yes, I'm joining with you. So that is the way that our politician must need to be proactive. Our politician must need to support the youth community. What I see Mr. Taleb has, he is supporting World Talent Economy Forum. We are completely the youth community trying to learn from the experienced people like today's panelist. Professor Donalds, you have a lot of experience, even you have a combination of Europe and Silicon Valley. So what you want to add more? Professor Donald?
Unmute.
There we go. Yeah, I was in the process. Well, I think that for one thing, I want to address a couple of things that other people said. Cities provide, they concentrate energy use, and they provide a very, very good place to be able to make changes. For an instance, there's a lot of work being done now on trying to figure out how to basically fix all the windows in the skyscrapers in New York, because energy leaks out. A huge amount of energy leaks out of them. If they replace all the windows, it can greatly reduce energy use. I think, people vary, but if you look at the number of people that are in cities and the number of people that live in rural areas and the migration towards the cities, it's easy to believe that people prefer cities. I grew up in a rural area, and I hate rural areas. I don't like the people that live there. I don't like anything about it. And I much prefer being in a place with people and opportunity and things that I can do, and different kinds of people with different backgrounds, from different races, from different cultures. It's to me, that's what life is about. And one of the things I do want to point out also, that polio and smallpox did not go away by themselves. They didn't just fade out. It was a huge global international effort where people worked together to eradicate smallpox. I've been a member of the Rotary Club, and the Rotary Club had volunteers that went everywhere in the world to vaccinate people against polio, and it's practically been eradicated. I mean, there's small pockets of it in Afghanistan and a few other places, but that was done by a coordination between the WHO, NGOs like the Rotary, and governments. In Africa right now, there's a problem with governments that are kleptocracies, where they have a person in power that basically uses the government as a source of their own enrichment. And of course, we just had a president that was trying to do the same thing in the United States. So it's not endemic to one particular place.
Very true.
Yeah, and that was scary for everyone in the world to see that the United States could have the same thing happen. It was pretty awful. But I really do think that if you look at the examples of all the times that we have worked together, there's an economic theory, and it came actually from a Nobel Prize economist named James Buchanan, who was originally at the University of Virginia when he came up with this, was the idea of public choice economics. And the idea is that people who work in governments by nature work in their own self-interest, and they're going to use the governments to enrich themselves and not to benefit the people around them. And I think there's multiple examples of hardworking, dedicated civil servants who are actually making less money than they could in industry working for the government. I met a guy in a pub, and what he did is he worked with regulation in the the pharmaceutical industry. And so he actually worked with the FDA. He was the pharmaceutical guy. And I said, "Oh, that must be horrible working for, these evil government people." And he said, "Absolutely not." He said, "These people are hardworking, dedicated servants that make less money than they could working for the pharmaceutical industry, and they're doing it for the benefit of everybody. They're great people." So it's some of our assumptions, I think, are just incorrect. And where can education go? Like, I have students in Japan, and I was talking to one the other day, and he said, "Well, in Japan, when we're kids, we clean up the classrooms ourselves. We don't have janitors." And he said, "So our block gets together for periodically, and we go out and we clean up all the streets everywhere around." He says, "We've just grown up with the idea that we work together and we make things happen together." The United States has really, really got a group of people who absolutely think that's the worst thing in the world. They don't want to pay taxes, just like Texas wanted to secede. I don't know quite how to change that, but there are ways. I mean, and speaking to what Talib said, I think is about kind of the phoenix rebuilding from the ashes. What made Finland such an egalitarian country is that they were completely controlled by Swedes at one point. And so the Finns themselves were second-class citizens, and the Swedes they actually conquered the country, and then, things changed, but they still owned a lot of the land and a lot of the property and a lot of the wealth. And there was a civil war. And the Civil War was just horrible. I mean, neighbors were fighting neighbors. They even opened concentration camps. And when the war was over, they all sat down and they said, we're going to make a society where this can't happen again. And of course, it can happen anywhere. It happened in the United States, but they built a society the taxes are high. People can't become super rich and dominate everything. I mean, people can become quite rich, but not to the extent we have in the United States. And they just developed an attitude. I went to graduate school there and it didn't cost me anything. They believe in education, modern technology, innovation. People can believe those things. So the technology is like Brian was doing with educational technology that can begin to get people's attitude and start to realize that some of these assumptions we have they just don't pan out. I mean, there are places in the world that have different assumptions and they behave differently. So and I think that to some degree, we're going to start seeing, I agree that we are making progress. Uh-oh. We lost our moderator. Yay.
Thank you, then.
Yeah. Yes, Professor Paul.
Yes, I think the example of the of some of the Scandinavian countries, and also Finland is a great example. I mean, these are these are things that work. These are countries that work, and if we could get more and more nations around the world to use the information that the best practices that these countries have done and to apply them to their own societies, then that's that's a great way to sort of leverage, not reinvent the wheel. I mean, I think a lot of countries, they just want to reinvent the wheel all the time. They want to do their own thing. And I know in Canada, we see this even within political parties. Whatever policies the Liberals, when they're in power, bring up, when they're replaced by the Conservatives, and they'll they want to start from scratch and wipe out all of the policies that the liberals brought in and do their own thing, and then the liberals win again, and then they, everything starts. So we're in an endless cycle of not really advancing, but just going around in circles. So I think, also, this can apply at all different scales of size, right? It can apply, with countries taking best practices of other countries, but also, some cities, work extremely well, and other ones are dismal failures. So even, within countries. So, but, lots of cities want to really, I don't know what this thing is people always want to try to do their own thing and reinvent the wheel and start from scratch, as opposed to, using the success stories and copying success stories of others. Maybe it's sort of a human psychology thing that we need to kind of figure out. Yeah, I mean, I always look at the U.S. as a big puzzle. I mean, they, in terms of education, they have some of the best schools in the world, but they also have the worst schools in the world, I would argue. Some even, worse than third world countries. You can look at any aspect, and they're a country of extremes for sure. I mean, it looked, from a lot of the world thought the U.S. was going to, lose democracy essentially, and have a dictator, an autocrat in power, and sort of wondered in consternation how could a country so powerful as the U.S. Basically be defeated by one man. Right? I mean, that's what it looked like. One crazy man just about brought down the entire country, politically. So, it's we're seeing lots of extremes across the planet, not just extremes in climate, but extremes in political systems, extremes in, disasters. I think a lot of this, I think, comes down to, if you take the U.S. example, the number of disasters, climate-related disasters, is skyrocketing. How many Hurricane Sandys or Hurricane Katrinas will the country withstand? And the answer isn't infinite, right? Eventually there'll be enough disasters in a country like the U.S. that, Katrina destroys a city and there's no money to rebuild that city. So people have to go to other regions or whatever. So, this is happening around the world. I mean, the costs, we have an organized society. Some people say we don't today, but, generally we have organized societies. We have, infrastructures that are functioning, financial systems, hospitals, services being performed. And the more and more hits that we take from, expensive hits that we take from climate-related disasters is weakening the whole system. And, eventually systems reach thresholds and collapse. If you look at complex system theory, we've made our society so complex that we've given up resilience. Our supply chains are so the schedules for supply chains are so tight. A part goes into a car manufacturer and it's in a car within that day, for example. So if that supply is disrupted, then the whole system basically is impacted negatively. So we need to go look at the, we need to simplify a lot of things in our society to make them resilient again. We're making them more and more complex, and we're losing all of our resilience.
Yes, Mr. Talib, Professor Paul come up with the idea of resilience. So what your advice specifically on this point?
I'm sorry, I may have to leave you soon because I have another commitment. You know that, Sharif.
Yes.
But
Yes,
let me just respond to what Paul said. I think what Donald said is very, very true. You have to see the history of mankind in a more global, holistic way. Man has always been able to prevail. It gets worse before it gets better. Definitely. That's the story of mankind. It's going to get worse, but it will get better. You have to believe in that. You have to put yourself in one of the two shoes. Either you believe in mankind or not. Mankind will be able to overcome this issue of climate change, definitely. Maybe it's a bit too late now. It's getting to be too late. But that's not the point. The point is people know how to catch up at the end of the game. And that's where you either believe in people in the history or you don't. I know, Paul, that you're very disappointed in what's happening in the United States. I'm disappointed too. Everybody is, but it had to get to that so that you could wake up a little bit and see what you are doing wrong. Because if you compare, say to Finland, for example, Finland had a lot to learn from its past, and I believe that the good nature of people would eventually prevail. Definitely. Thank you so much, Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for joining today. Hopefully in the future, you will guide us and you will support World Talent Economy Forum initiative. We are just growing, but what we are doing, whatever we are developing, like 220 episodes, 300 speakers from around the world, they already join in World Talent Economy Forum, but we are distributing all of our knowledge, our speaker knowledge, around the world. Already 5 million peoples from Asia Pacific, different schools and universities, they're utilizing our content. Even in university from USA, from France, from Switzerland, from Malaysia, China, India, many countries, they're utilizing our content for DBA program as well as PhD program. So we're doing some hard works, but definitely the speakers support us a lot, and
Thank you
especially
so much,
our
Sharif.
audience.
You can
Thank you,
always
sir.
count on
Thank you,
that.
sir.
You can always count on
Thank
that.
you, sir.
It has been a very
Thank you,
enjoyable
sir.
event. I wish I could stay with you a bit longer. There are other
Thank
people
you,
waiting
sir.
for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
sir. Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you. God
Thank
bless
you.
you
Thank
all.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Yes.
Cheers.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Brentelman. Sorry. Actually, he just messaged me. He want to leave. So
No problem.
sorry. Yeah.
Not a problem. Yeah, I had a number of ideas. I think that one idea that I was thinking of was related to climate change. Paul was talking about the fact that things are so bad, maybe we need to start receding in certain ways. And I strongly disagree with that proposition. Personally, I think that if we can identify these things that are causing climate change, such as CO2, of course, we can figure out ways to actually resolve this. My perspective of CO2 seems to differ from a lot of folks in the mainstream. I see CO2 as a resource that has not been properly allocated. Some examples of ways to allocate CO2, there's a company that I like called Solar Foods. And Solar Foods uses a process where they've replaced sugar in a chain where they're feeding microbes CO2 as opposed to sugar, microbes such as yeast. And these microbes are able to then produce proteins that have fat content that are edible. And these proteins can be used in a diverse array of products such as cereals, protein bars, protein shakes, all sorts of things. And then you want to look at these other companies, there's Aleph Farms, and they're doing cultured meat, and they're figuring out how to take this meat and 3D print it. And so my vision is that we could make this steak from CO2. We don't even necessarily need the cultured product, which people would like that as well. But I mean, still, when you have all this other options with pasta and protein shakes, 9 million people annually die out of starvation. So, I don't see any reason to stop creating CO2 if we can turn this CO2 into a substance that can feed these 9 million people. That's just my own perspective, at least. And then, what we were talking about as well with, the politicians coming to save, I think that political things, globalized politics, they can be beneficial. But, I think that if you look in the United States and you look what we were just talking about with Donald Trump and how chaotic it's been over the last 4 years, one of the biggest reasons why, at least in my perspective, why that this has been the case is because power is flipped. The United States was designed in a way where local governments are able to kind of control their own ordinances, governance, and then this federal government is kind of like this backbone. But over the years, the United States federal government has taken to blackmail and extortion to get the rest of the country to fall in line, threatening things like pulling funding on roads, and if there's a number of different ways where slowly over time we've gotten to a point where we all just kind of look up to this federal government for it to guide us, and it's absolutely ridiculous. And of course it doesn't work, because the more distance that you create between this government, this ruling body, and those that are being ruled, the more problems you're going to create, the less reality that these decisions are based on. And so that's just my perspective, at least. I really think that there's definitely needs to be a kind of a blend of efforts. I don't think that we can just ignore the government, but I think that it really starts on the grassroots level for things to change. I think that the proposition of education being very essential in this process, I'd agree with. But more specifically, I think that education pertaining to mental health and human consciousness is something that we really need to start incorporating, because when I was in high school and middle school, we had social studies, but this wasn't anything about social science or anything like that. It was just a cheap version of history. And at the end of the day, these people don't understand human nature well enough. And so we go into these situations and we find ourselves, facing off in these disputes and, not seeing eye to eye, and we don't understand the inherent, just situation. We don't need to be right. What works in New York doesn't need to work in Texas. I've lived in both places and they're very different. And to expect, some kind of like central governing body to be able to make laws that will fairly govern both, of these kind of extreme diverse locations just doesn't make sense, in my opinion. I think that some kind of global oversight is helpful. Organizations like the UN, I think that that's really beneficial. I think that there are certain problems that need to be looked at in this kind of a global scale, but I don't think that right now, the way things are, there's just far too much drag in all of these political bodies, because we can't get over our little personal squabbles. This liberal conservative stuff, and most of these politicians, they're looking to save face and gain power, and they're not really looking to be sustainable, as was mentioned by some others in this discussion. It's about the kleptocracy and things of that nature. And so yeah, I think those are some ideas that I had. Yeah.
Thank you. A lot of things actually we add together, especially for developing sustainable cities. I directly want to go for the concluding remarks. I want to start from Professor Donalds, then Mr. Rob, then Mr. Brent, and finally Professor Paul. Yes. Professor Donald, unmute yourself.
I will say that I am a social scientist and have published in top sociology journals and books. And so I do study it, and I'm of kind of sociology where we study what are called social networks. And the term has been used since 1845. It got hijacked by websites, by Clay Shirky. I know exactly when it happened and who did it. But I think that the idea that governments are somehow different, separate from us, it's a mistake, because many things that we interact with are abstract. They don't exist. We can't smell a government. We can't touch a government. I mean, where is a government? A government is a basically agreement that we have, an unconscious agreement about what it's going to be. And I think that that one can think of the government as separate ruling body that is independent of us as individuals, but we can also think of a government as something that we create collectively. And that's, again, in countries like Japan and Finland and things like that, that's what they've done. And in Japan, they've had 7,000 COVID deaths, and they're about half the size population-wise of the United States. The United States has had 500,000 COVID deaths. So obviously Japan is doing something related to that that's much better. And again, it's because they believe that they're working together and that they can work together. So I think that what I'm going to immediately forget his name just said about how it's important that we believe that we can do these things. I think that's most critical. And I'm going to say that there's a book by a social scientist named Steven Pinker, and it's called The Better Angels of Our Nature. He took it from a quote from Abraham Lincoln. And he shows that if you look at the history of humanity, that there are fewer wars now. There's less crime. There's more people that, as a percentage, that have enough food. We can go right down the list and show that we are working together more. And we go through these bumps and grinds, like, right now we even know the source of it. In the United States, there's a white Protestant class that's shrinking, and they're becoming a minority, and they're fighting everyone. They're fighting everyone that's different than them, and they're the people that back Trump and things like that. But the reality is if you look at the demographics of younger people, and even in the same demographic, they don't buy that anymore. I mean, they've grown up with things like this, where they get to hear people from all over the world, all over different cultures, different attitudes, and they grow up in a world where people are diverse and different. So I think that the most important thing for anybody as an individual is to go out and really meet and learn from people that are different than you. And that's why I love cities so much, because there's that opportunity takes place. If you look at the United States right now, there's an urban-rural divide that's huge. I mean, the rural people voted for Trump, the urban people voted for Biden, and it's just in this, from the perspective of social networks, it's because they're in dense social networks where they just don't get a variety of information. So I'm going to just finish that with saying that I actually worked some with the Finnish government, and they deliberately try and make relationships with different countries, different kinds of people. Finland's famously neutral, and they and that diversity of relationships is what's one of the things that's really made Finland be able to be successful. And again, that also is what happened in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley wound up with incredible diversity of relationships, partially because Stanford and Berkeley and things like that are open to international students and international relations. And so that at core is what the kind of education that we really need to have is to be able to have optimism and diversity, and that's what my research has shown.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Professor Donald. Mr. Rob.
Well, we have a sustainability problem. I mean, there's no argument we're in a world of hurt. We're consuming and wasting too much. We're not efficient in our use of energy resources. We knew back in the 1930s that going to a petrochemical model was going to destroy the planet. Yet most of that research was concealed because it came in after the petrochemical industry gained power, and they had control over had control over much of what was being shared. And much like the tobacco industry was able to fight for a long period of time the perception that tobacco and smoking was deadly, the petrochemical industry has been even more powerful in concealing the fact that the industry, as it's currently being executed, is killing us. And so coming around to a sustainable, and I'm using a sustainable in a different way here, method to not only mitigate the current problem but to prevent it from recurring, will require a much stronger central government type of effort, something with teeth. Our existing centralized capabilities aren't capable of doing this. They don't have the authority, they don't have the power, and the states control much of the resources, and that hasn't been transferred. So we've certainly talked about the fact that when it gets bad enough, we'll undoubtedly do something, but bad enough becomes a problem. We can model this. We have the capability now of creating computer models to showcase specifically how bad it's going to get before governments come around to the idea that we're going to fix it. And I have a feeling if we did that, it would look like a disaster movie. So in the end, our best approach, at least individually, is to stay informed, make sure that our news sources are valid. There's a huge effort to misinform and validating our news sources so that we are well founded on our views, and so we're not part of the problem and part of the solution, and then work collectively and aggressively to at least solve the amount of contamination we're individually contributing, and then support efforts collectively to both correct and stop doing damage together. So the end result is we build a better world. In the end, I do agree with Don. Part of the problem is our lack of support for diversity. It becomes us versus them, which is not sustainable if you want to fix big problems like this. It's got to be all of us together. And we've got to be able to reach here across the aisle, or at least the folks that disagree with us, and enter into civil discourse to at least try to reasonably convince others that we need to do this and we need to do it now. But much of what we're going to have to do to fix the problem has more to do with social engineering than it does with physical engineering. And if we don't do that, we're going to have dire outcomes. I mean, we're talking about doing things like blocking out the sun to reduce the heat introduction of the planet, which is undoubtedly going to cause a whole bunch of other problems we haven't anticipated, because we're going to be breaking what created the existing balance. So, but that's where we're going to go if we don't fix this naturally, and if we don't get our arms around this pretty quickly, the next generations are going to have a very sad future, and certainly I hope that we can fix this. Some of my old friends like Bill Gates are working like bandits to try to address this, both with technology and with outreach. But there's only so much even a billionaire can do. We do have to collectively agree that this is something that's more important than status. It's more important than wealth. It really has to do with whether we're breathing or not in 30 or 40 years, and should be a higher priority than it currently is.
Thank you, Mr. Rob. Mr. Brentelman.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciated what you were saying there, Rob. I do agree that we all need to come together on this, and that we can't just rely on lone billionaires. And I agree to an extent that there needs to be some kind of central backbone to things. But my concern is just that when people kind of look at something and expect them to do it, that kind of creates some issues, because we all just expect the government to do it for us, or expect the billionaires, or whatever it might be. And that's just really dangerous. And so I think that's encourages me to think that there needs to be kind of like more of a grassroots type thing. But I think that at the end of the day, there needs to be that kind of a strong backbone towards these types of efforts. I also think that I think that if we have this kind of central globalized government, though, I think that right now politics and governance, it's this power thing, and power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely, as they say. And so I think that it's difficult to create some kind of power structure that doesn't inherently magnetize these power hungry sociopaths and psychopaths, or whatever it might be, because I think that that's a major issue when you're just creating this structure of power where we're all supposed to be regulated through that source. It just kind of attracts the wrong people, because as we were talking about earlier with politicians, it might be wise to appoint people that are capable and level-headed, rather than just allowing people to gravitate because they want power. And so I think that there are some inherent concerns, but I think that I agree that we're on the right track with this conversation. So.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. One specific point I just want to add, because I'm from developing nations and I have deeper understanding about the economical, culture, social, and many more things. I never believed that developing nations need to be dependent on developed nations. I'm very honest with you. Even I work with different countries planning ministry. I'm observing right now the development partners' money and everything. Now they do not want to take, because they have their own financial capacity. They can build up their own projects, and I'm sure they have lot of capacity, but yes, politicians are must need to be responsible how they support their local community, how they support their own people. This is also very important. But every aspect we always blaming the politicians, but it's my personal understanding everywhere there is a good and bad things. Thesis and antithesis we become synthesis as a human. So even politics, corporations, everywhere there are good things and bad things, but hopefully we will take all of the good example. But personally I believe, I'm from developing nations. Developing nations has their own capacity. Even always I discuss with the politicians and the corporation and business organization, I always say that why you have to dependent on the first worlds. So build up your own things. Yes, knowledge is important, definitely we can gather knowledge from the first world, this is very important, but we have to we can build up our own ecosystem. And yes, definitely we have to be very much careful about uh, this kind of corruptions and everything. If we can make at least, that's why I always like Professor Donald's examples, like he brings some example from Europe. So if we can learn something from the transparency and policy, I think our opportunities is very high, because developing nations has huge people, huge populations. So people, if there is a people, so there is a business. I saw in my personal life just 5 to 10 years how come a small company becomes $1 billion company. So I think they have huge potentiality, they have to utilize it, and they should not depend always for the first world, the deep, like for the government or the billionaires can solve these things. Things are not like that. I agree, especially I agree, and I request that from the developing nation, those youth, university, policymakers, whatever you are observing World Talent Economy forums, please try to develop your ecosystem. Try to develop your own, I always say own, like Silicon Valley in your own country with your youth community. So that is our objective. We are also supporting many schools and the university, so we need your support. And I just want another point, like this June we have our conference with the collaboration of International Islamic University. We are developing our scientific committee. So like Professor Paul, like Mr. Robs, my Professor Donalds, I want to welcome you in our scientific committee. Mr. Brent, you and me, we have to organize everything. So they will be in the scientific committee. So I want to invite all of the speakers, those who are experienced, to join our scientific committee, because we have to vet from the university, and hopefully it will be one of the successful conference, because uh, I'm sure our World Talent Economy Forums, even many countries, Prime Minister Office, many big corporations, every day they are observing, and even the feedback, give me the feedback that what's going on, how they implementing our strategy. Yes, I directly want to go for the final comments from Professor Paul.
Yeah, yes. Thank you, everybody, all the panelists, and thank you again, Sharif, for organizing these sessions. I think we've been talking, a bit about sociology, and it comes down to human nature. How we interact with each other and how we form groups. And part of human nature is that there's a small percentage of people that are basically psychopaths and lack empathy for any other person. And that small percentage of people tends to be more driven than the average person, and also they're willing to perform any and all steps to get ahead without regard for anybody else's opinions. They'll step on anybody's toes to pursue their aims of getting more and more power. And these people, these psychopaths without empathy, tend to get positions of influence and power in governments, even making it to the highest office in the United States. And there's other people following in their paths. And once they're there, they they disregard all order and protocol and do whatever is necessary to maintain their power and to get as many of their friends and colleagues and family members with as much power and make as much money. And this is what we're seeing, not just in the US, but in other places. And one of the things is most countries have first past the post. So you're voting for this party A or party B, and whichever party gets in has their whole slate of policies, which they push through, eliminating the previous policies of governments that are in. And then you can get this vicious cycle of, one party getting in and destroying everything that other parties have done. And the problem is it takes a long time to build trust and create good policies and do the right thing. And it takes one day to sign some things and completely destroy policies that other people have put in. So the destructive process can be instantaneous, and the building up process takes a lot of time. So we're seeing a lot of these things in the political realm. And one of the things we should perhaps look at is having more of a voting on issues, as opposed to having collaborative governments, not just one party in charge, and have the public vote on important issues, and then those issues are maintained with change of government from one party to another party. So that allows us to address long-term problems like climate, as opposed to the system now. On a climate and physical systems basis, we're undergoing abrupt climate change. A very clear picture is emerging of the basic trends that are occurring. We're going to lose the Arctic sea ice in one summer, one September in the near future. After that happens, we might have no ice in September in the Arctic, and then the next year, it might be September and October, a couple of months, and within a decade, perhaps no ice in the Arctic year round. Of course, this will cause a complete rewiring of the global atmospheric circulation patterns and the ocean patterns, and we're going to be in a completely different climate system. And we're heading there. And, generally when you head there and there's no impediments, you get there. So, it's basically a race of, can we turn the tide? Can we change the story? Because if we don't, then we're going to get where we're heading, and it's going to happen very rapidly. And, that we'll have to figure out what to do. But the turmoil level is, I think now we're seeing lots of, often before a system kind of snaps or breaks or hits a tipping point into another state. The best example is a canoe. You're in a canoe and you tip, and then you can right and tip and right, but you reach this threshold where you go over and you're in a different state. You're in the water. There's a lot of these tipping points in the system. And, for example, if we don't cut our emissions rapidly soon, we'll lose the agency to reduce greenhouse gas levels in the atmosphere, because more will come out of the natural system than we put in ourselves, and we'll have lost control, lost if we had any control to begin with. But where these tipping points and exponential changes are very hard for for our minds to fathom. I mean, we think of linear changes in temperature, for example, but many things are exponential. Hopefully, we've learned something about exponential growth from the virus stuff in this year and last. But we'll muddle along, and it's hopefully we can enact changes, but our climate doesn't care too much about us. It's just doing its thing, and its thing is to have great warming right now, and that will continue as long as we can talk as much as we want, but that's what's happening right now. So anyway, the part of human nature too is to have hope. So we have to do what we can. We have to do what we can from our understanding of the climate system and the human systems, sociological systems, and do our own part to try to get positive change, because that's what we are as a human being. So thank you again, everybody, for this great discussion.
Thank you for joining today's session. So hopefully we have session from Monday to Friday, so hopefully we will bring more interesting topic next week, and we can solve many interesting problem together. We at present we are just focusing on educations. Hopefully by educations we can at least train the youth community. Youth actually can empower the ecosystem. Youth can solve many things. Even in the COVID-19 situation, we can understand that how youth can solve many problems from their countries. Mr. Taleb, do you want to add some point? We are in.
No.
Yes.
I was very interested in rejoining you because I finished my other call, and I'm glad that you're still on. I just wanted to thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
all.
Thank you for
Thank you,
today's
sir.
session. Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.